I'm travel journalist Bill Cleveland, and this is the Ultimate American Music Bucket List.
The guy was so talented at his lyrics, and that's why Bob Dylan appreciated him so much, I think. He liked the music too, but I think Dylan was just blown away by how Chuck Berry could tell in 2.5 to 3 minutes this story. Not just repeating the same lyrics over and over, just go through a whole story. And you could feel yourself in that car with that girl. I couldn't get her safety belt off. I mean, just all that kind of stuff. Wow, how can you beat that?
Chuck Berry was one of the most influential musicians in the history of American music. A native of St. Louis, Missouri, where he spent most of his life and performed regularly until his death in 2017. From Johnny B. Good to Maybelline to No Particular Place to Go, countless rock and roll hits that inspired an entire generation of singers, songwriters, and musicians who imitated everything from the way Berry wrote lyrics to the way he jammed on his guitar and his signature duck walk across the stage. And he's not the only musical icon with St. Louis ties. I'm visiting the Delmar Loop and Blueberry Hill right now on the Ultimate American Music Bucket List.
Deep down in Louisiana, close to New Orleans, way back up in the woods that might be evergreens, stood a log cabin made of earth and wood. Well, lived a country boy named Johnny B. Good. Never learned to read and write so well. He could play a guitar like a ring and a bell. Go, Daddy, go, go. Go, Daddy, go, go. Go, Daddy, go, go. Go, 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 go.
In 1958, Chuck Berry released a not-so-biographical single that has remained a classic more than 60 years after it scorched up the Billboard charts that spring. Unlike Johnny B. Good, Chuck grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, not New Orleans, Louisiana, and Berry could, in fact, read and write. He wasn't really a country boy either. His original lyric read, "My, how that little colored boy could play," but he changed the line to get more play on the radio. Berry was a masterful writer and performer, and not unlike many of the other creative geniuses in music history, Berry had a checkered past. That included jail time and unseemly behavior. Even behind bars, though, he cranked out hit songs, including a title quite fitting for a person sitting in jail called No Particular Place to Go. Chuck Berry was the first artist inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and earned accolades as the trailblazer of the genre from everyone from the Beatles to the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, and anyone that's ever plucked the strings of an electric guitar. It's here in St. Louis where Berry spent his time after his heydays of rock and roll. Once a month, he'd perform in a venue called the Duck Room, a literal basement beneath Blueberry Hill, a restaurant and bar owned by Berry's longtime close friend, Joe Edwards.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And when you look at the St. Louis Walk of Fame, St. Louis itself has never really been able to do a soundbite of the musical influence. Like New Orleans is known for jazz, Memphis for soul, Chicago for blues, but St. Louis has all those and more. And so St. Louisans have never really gotten on to one track that is a soundbite of what is possible and what did occur here. And gospel, Willie Mayford Smith, the co-founder of gospel music as we know it today, along with a person in Chicago. So it's a rich heritage, and I'm very proud to be a St. Louisan. And people come from all over the world to Blueberry Hill because it's actually internationally known. A lot of that's due to Chuck Berry playing here, having played here 209 times. monthly concerts where they would come from Japan and Brazil and the UK to see him up close in a 340 capacity room called the Duck Room. And I just love this place, and I think St. Louisans are very proud of it too.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Chuck Berry. I would imagine when most people like me come to chat with you, they want to talk about Chuck Berry and your relationship. And so as we talk about this ultimate American music bucket list of things for people to see across the country with music ties, American music ties, I guess. Chuck Berry certainly has to be on the list. As mentioned, I'm from St. Louis. Proud that Chuck Berry is from my hometown as well. And of course, his great influence on music around the world. There's a Chuck Berry statue right across from where we're standing.
Yep.
What year did that go in?
Oh gosh. Maybe 8 to 10 years ago. I should know off the top of my head, but it was a cool ceremony. It was a super hot summer day when it went in, but it was great. And it's an in-motion type of statue, the most living, greatest in-motion sculptor alive today. I think Harry Weber, who did that, is so cool because Chuck's poised on one foot as if he's just about to go into the duck walk. And the statue actually can kind of vibrate and shake a little bit, where it's like dun 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 dun. And it's 8 feet tall and it's gorgeous. And people from all around the country and the world take photos in front of that thing all the time. He was the first person inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He was the first person inducted in the St. Louis Walk of Fame, and he is considered the father of rock and roll. Whether it's Beach Boys, Beatles, Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, they all respect his influence on their music.
Right. And he had what you will just maybe call an interesting upbringing and some tough times. And but during those times, he came up with these amazing songs that we know today as absolute classics and maybe what a lot of people would call the beginnings of rock and roll, not too terribly far from where we're standing in here in St. Louis.
Right. Yeah. He was one of those cool people who was born and raised in St. Louis and never left St. Louis, except for a few times. Well, touring for one thing, but I mean a few times in the big house. But he loved St. Louis, and his motivation in life was to provide for his family, and that's why he never left. Other musicians have gone to Nashville or New York or L.A. Chuck never left St. Louis. He loved St. Louis, and he kept performing and writing his songs based here.
Yeah, and Joe, I wrote a book called Finding the American Dream, which was all about people who came from not very much and ended up being a huge success. He could be one that we could include in that list, because I mean his house, I believe, at least one of the homes that he lived in, is it in North St. Louis or North County?
It's
still
in
there?
North St. Louis in the Ville neighborhood, and one shotgun type of house, with a basement, but I mean just a pretty smallish compared to the mansions he got later on,
right,
as he became successful musically. But it was pretty cool to see that house and the stuff that he built himself, because his father was a carpenter, and he did a lot of his own concrete pouring of the steps and so on. So he was really a very active man and knew a lot about photography and carpentry and everything. He was a very interesting person that way, that he always wanted to learn more. I mean, I never cared about learning more about computers. No, well, he did. And he recorded a lot of his most recent songs before he passed, on the computer, and learned the different musical programs and all. So his mind was always active. And if he had not become one of the greatest songwriters of all time, the first poet laureate of rock and roll, he would have been a great comedian. He had such a command of the English language, it was astounding. And it's reflected in some of his songs, like even in Maybelline. When I was motivating over the hill, okay, motivating. He could have taken 5 or 6 words to describe, okay, I'm driving fast on the highway, I'm about to go over the hill, and I'm in my motor car, and the wind is blowing through my hair. Well, just all of a sudden he reduced that to one wonderful word, motivating.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with Chuck Berry. When did you meet him? How did that friendship develop and get to a point where he was performing here at Blueberry Hill in the Loop?
Growing up, if you'd ever told me I would become Chuck Berry's best friend, I would have said that's kind of nutty. That's impossible. But the first time I ever met him was in the 1960s after a concert he did, and I just went up to him. It's a great show. But I didn't see him again in a meaningful way until the early 1980s, and that's when our friendship started. It's one of those inexplicable things, but everything that I promised him I would do, whether it's a concert or an appearance and all, and I honored, and everything he said, okay, I'll honor what I'm telling you. And so it's a handshake thing. But he was very, very closed as far as letting people into his life, because he had gotten burned so many times, especially in the Deep South during the 1950s and 60s when he would tour. And so he was very hesitant to open up. And somehow our friendship just grew. We were very different people in certain ways, but very similar in certain ways. And that friendship was just incredible.
This is a song about a man who had a lot to do with music. As a matter of fact, a relished memory in my mind he was. And a good musician, might I say so. This man was named Beethoven. No, he was named Beethoven. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask him to forgive us. Roll over and listen to a little of this.
You remember the first time that he performed here at Blueberry Hill?
Yeah, the very first time, he just kind of sat in with the band in what we call the Elvis room here, because I have a 24-foot display case with Elvis memorabilia in it, underneath where we're talking right now. And it was pretty great to see him just sit in with local musicians and all. And then they did a couple of things in that same room with a professor from the Northeast in New York that was taking students. He was taking students around the country to meet up with different people like William Burroughs and Chuck Berry and all that, and give them a true lesson in history of culture in the United States. And Chuck did 2 concerts over the first couple of years that way. And then when the Duck Room opened, all heck broke loose. It was so cool to have a stage that really was wide, and the sound system was great. The ceilings were higher. I lowered the floor of a basement in a building built in 1911, which is crazy to do. It was very expensive to do, for one thing, but I really wanted 10-foot ceilings and not the 7-foot ceilings that were there. I took out a bearing brick wall and built the stage in the Duck Room with a small dressing room and with a shower. And at the 340 capacity level, there's no place in the country, I don't think, that has those wonderful conditions for touring bands. They can load in right outside, take an elevator down with their equipment, and bands love it. Ed Sheeran, who's the most listened to artist in the world currently today as I speak, played in the Duck Room at an afternoon concert. And the English guy is just so smart. He's a great songwriter, and he also was a student of history, musical history, where he started talking about, when we talked after the concert outside in front of my old car, a 57 Buick Special. I also have a 64 Impala convertible, but and he started asking me about Donny Hathaway. Most St. Louisans don't know about Donny Hathaway and his influence on music and people that come in the R&B field especially. So I respected him from the get-go. When he was only 21 years old, it's like, wow, this guy is cool. And now he's like the biggest star, one of the biggest stars in the planet.
Yeah. What? So the Duck Room. I think most people in St. Louis have at least heard this. Maybe not in other parts of the country, but certainly here in St. Louis. You mentioned the acoustics. You mentioned the ceilings and so forth. When people were sitting in there at any time, really, and they would watch Chuck Berry perform, what were some things that maybe people were surprised by or taken back by when they saw him performing up close and in person?
How spur of the moment he was. People were always amazed, I think, how every concert was different. And he was going to play a lot of his hits. He knew he would, but he himself didn't know what song he was going to play in what order. In fact, sometimes he would change right in the middle of a song to a different song. His reaction to his songs. And if he saw that people were kind of listless a little bit, he would change from that ballad right in the middle of the song into a rocker, and all of a sudden have them on their feet. And they appreciated that so much. It was just so fun, and everybody left just worn out, like they participated. It's almost like they were on stage rocking and rolling. And at the end of the show, a lot of times people would get up on stage and dance, and he would invite them up there for that last reelin' and rockin' finale. I also admired Chuck Berry because he didn't do encores. He put everything into it. And anybody, whether they're young or old, but especially when you get older, it's why not put everything into it and not do the fake encore? And so people knew they were going to get it all. He just laid it out there on the stage, and people went away, what a show, baby.
Yeah, and so he passed away
5 years ago.
Yeah, I knew it wasn't all that long ago. And I remember, just having lived here, the outpouring of, and this is such a bummer the way this works in life. All these great compliments and accolades, and you find out how much people, how much somebody like him meant to so many people. But a lot of times we don't get that until after we're gone. You know what I'm saying? And so, but I do remember having lived here when that happened. Just from all around the world, people were either visiting here, talking about Chuck Berry and his ties to St. Louis. So his after he had passed away, I knew they did a memorial, and you were, I'm sure, part of that.
Yeah, I organized it at the Pageant Concert Nightclub right up the street, the building I built in the year 2000, which he also was the inaugural act, like he was in the Duck Room at Blueberry Hill. That's how tight the friendship was. I always appreciated that. It's so cool to have the father of rock and roll open two of your places, wow, with performing. And it was just an honor and exciting for me to reintroduce him to people like Paul McCartney when he played in St. Louis at Busch Stadium, the old baseball stadium, the previous one. And the same with Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan performed 3 concerts at the Pageant right up the street, and I reintroduced them too. And Dylan just, he respected Chuck Berry so much, I can't tell you. It was like those are the 2 greatest poet laureates of rock and roll. And for one to say salute to the other was pretty damn cool.
That is neat. You've had a pretty good life, pretty good track record here, getting to meet so many influential people, and in music, certainly.
Yeah, no, I've led a very lucky life. And I think a lot of it is just people, they're comfortable coming in Blueberry Hill. They know they're not going to get bombarded by a bunch of staff people or customers and all that. So they can actually come in and enjoy it. And all. It's amazing the number of people who come through here, and the ones that I've met elsewhere and all. I never thought I'd meet a president. I've met 4 presidents, not all at Blueberry Hill, but in St. Louis, and when they were in St. Louis. And the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court had dinner with a bunch of federal judges at Blueberry Hill for like 2 hours. He was already Chief Justice. The big cases hadn't come up yet, but the biggest ones that are, and everybody said, oh, you ought to go to Blueberry Hill and have burgers and pitchers of beer, and darn it, that's not what he did. How cool is that?
I was going to say, did they have toasted ravioli, which will mean nothing to anybody outside of St. Louis? But
Right. No, it's a great dish, though. But it was pretty neat, and it was just he was very low key, and very unassuming and very polite, and I thought, what a good Chief Justice he'll make, or was making at that time.
Yeah.
Joe Perry from Aerosmith and his wife Billy and their kids. We spent a whole Saturday afternoon with Chuck Berry and his family in the room right above the Duck Room. That's the kind of stuff, the magic that happens here.
Yeah. All right, then last question, and it's one that you won't want to answer, but your favorite Chuck Berry song?
It depends on the time of day, and the time of year, what I think is my favorite song of his. I think probably the coolest one based on history is Johnny Be Good, because It's on the Voyager space probes, Voyager 1 and 2, that are, on the gold-plated copper record. That both of those have left our solar system. They're way out there in space. So if anybody discovers them, 10 trillion years from now or whatever it is, they're going to find out what music was like in the United States, on the Earth. And that's pretty cool. No other musician, living or not living, could ever have that accolade. Just pretty amazing. But then there are other ones that really tell the tale, like Brown Eyed Handsome Man, and even just Too Much Monkey Business, and there's so many. The guy was so talented at his lyrics, and that's why Bob Dylan appreciated him so much, I think. He liked the music too, but I think Dylan was just blown away by how Chuck Berry could tell in 2.5 to 3 minutes this story, not just repeating the same lyrics over and over, just go through a whole story. And you could feel yourself in that car with that girl. It couldn't get her safety belt off. Just all that kind of stuff. Wow, how can you beat that?
Yeah.
All right. This is an oldie, but well, it's an oldie where I come from. All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Go, 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 Johnny, go, 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 Johnny, go, go, go. Chuck, it's Marvin, your cousin Marvin Berry. You know that new sound you're looking for? Well, listen to this.
Pretty great. Well, Joe, it was great meeting you finally after all these years. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Blueberry Hill, in the Loop in St. Louis, Missouri, right across the street from the beautiful Chuck Berry statue. And you're right. I've seen a lot of statues in my travels, and that one's one of the best. It's got a lot of life to it, which is really tough to do, honestly,
Very difficult.
for a sculptor. But it's a really great statue, and so thank you for your work in preserving St. Louis music history and keeping those stories alive. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
If you'd like to learn more, you can check out AmericanMusicBucketList.com. That's also where you can order a copy of the book, The Ultimate American Music Bucket List, a travel guide for music lovers and road trippers. Please help keep these great musical stories alive by telling your friends and family about the podcast. And thanks for listening. I'm Bill Cleveland. You can check out my travels across the country by visiting my website, BillOnTheRoad.com.